Welcome this evening. Thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your evening to join our program. Let me go ahead and get my screen share set up. Okay. We seeing the right one, Cheryl? I think so.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Drag a few things out of the way. So just a little bit about me in the University of Missouri Extension. I have been a nutrition and health education specialist with MU for just celebrated my 6th anniversary. And I am from, Extension has been my career for over 30 years. I've worked in 3 different extension systems. Started out in Texas through Texas A&M University, and then also in Kansas through Kansas State University. I always like to give a little bit of a brief commercial about the Extension Service. It is an outreach arm of the land-grant university system, and our role is to bring the education and research that's done at the land-grant universities, not only at MU but our sister land grants across the country, translate that knowledge or research and knowledge into education that we can take out to the people to just help them improve their lives. And kind of, how in a nutshell, how we like to say, is we like to serve Missouri and deliver Mizzou. So that is what we do. I am a nutrition and health education specialist, and so that's the arena that I work in. So tonight we're gonna talk a little bit just about those resolutions, that we tend to make this time of year, and we always like to think that we want to have that new year, new you kind of approach. And we're just going to talk about some strategies to help us just to be more successful in developing healthy habits. So can anyone besides me identify with Maxine saying, I think I made too many New Year's resolutions. It took me almost a full day to break them. Sometimes I think it feels that way. We sometimes bite off a little bit more than we can chew, have some really grand ideas about, an approach that we're going to take with the turn the page of a calendar year. But sometimes we're not always successful, or we might be successful for a while in adopting newer habits. And so today we're just going to look at how we can, maybe how we can be just a little bit more successful than Maxine is. When we think about the why, why resolutions fail, there's a variety of reasons. A lot of times, though, it just really goes back to basics like goals and habits. And we just might have a lot of vagueness and ambiguity in goals that we might set. And we'll see some examples of that as we go along. And sometimes we don't allow ourselves enough grace as we maybe set some goals or some resolutions, and then that might not just, we might not be successful in that for the long period of time. And so we've developed this all or nothing mindset. And, that certainly doesn't help in goal success. Sometimes it has to do with the arena of support. We just don't have enough support to help us achieve those goals that we might set out for ourselves. Maybe we might start out gung-ho with some motivation, and we just start out strong out of the gate, but then it just doesn't last. So we need to maybe look at how are we motivated so that we can make that motivation long-term. Bottom line is, habits are hard to break. Good habits are we don't want to think about breaking those, right? But, if they're not so great habits, maybe we've got some not so healthy habits that have been with us for a long time, they tend to get ingrained. And so they are hard to break. So, that's something that we just need to really do some analysis on. And we'll talk about some ways that we can do that. And then we tend to put the focus on what we should do rather than what we want to do. And again, that's going to take a little bit of a flipping of the script in our mind to help us really think about analyzing, some of our motives and motivations. And really, that word "should" is oftentimes, gets associated with guilt and shame. It's like, well, I know I should do this or that. But it's not tends not to be a positive word because of that association with guilt or shame, or even just like the absence of making a decision. So we want to try and reframe things so that we can look at those things in a manner of saying of things that we want to do. And we'll have a strategy that we use in a lot of our evidence-based programs at MU Extension. So we want to start just with our why. We want to consider the why behind what type of decision or habit or resolution, whatever it is that we're trying to ingrain into our daily behaviors or routine behaviors. And so we start with just an examination of what motivates us. Is it an intrinsic or an internal motivation that kind of derives some satisfaction? Or is it more of an extrinsic motivation that, that is kind of driven more by rewards or even punishment? So that intrinsic motivation certainly will take us a lot further than extrinsic motivations. Again, we want to focus on those things that we want. And too often we come about some of our decisions from a fear mindset, and this might be particularly true with health-related behaviors. Oh, the doctor said, XYZ in my blood work, and could increase my risk of diabetes or heart disease or a chronic illness such as that. And so sometimes fear may start out being a motivator, but really we need to focus in on how we can flip that and focus on what we want out of a certain behavior, and then keep our primary focus working towards that. And then choosing goals that have some strong personal and emotional value. And if we're framing this, because most of my examples are framed around some health behaviors that we're going to talk about tonight, because that's honestly one of the, the number one behaviors behind New Year's resolutions, if you will. So when we choose goals that have strong personal or emotional value, they tend to be a little bit more successful in our approach. For example, if your goal is to be able to get down on the floor and play with your kids or your grandkids, then maybe you'll take an approach of focusing on foods that provide you with more lasting energy to keep you going. And you might also need to think about moving around a lot more during the day in general, just to maximize your flexibility and your strengths. And the thing is, with behaviors such as that, you might actually see some of those things that number one New Year's resolution that we seem to see. You might even find that some of those behaviors help you lose weight. That is the number one resolution that usually happens with people who do make those resolutions. So we want to, but if I just say I want to lose weight, that might not take us as far as, gee, I wish I had more energy to play with my grandkids. So you can kind of see the difference there, hopefully. So how do we start with this? And it really just starts with an assessment of really looking at, what am I doing right here, right now? And these are just some good questions to ask yourself, and they do kind of align with that right now. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? Why is it important that I do this right now? And then we kind of look at that cost benefit analysis. What are the consequences now if I don't change the way I eat? What are the consequences later? What are the benefits now? What are the benefits later? And so just, we just try to break that down just as simply as we can. And this is just a good kind of just a baseline assessment to help you think about those considerations of behavior change. So told you we'd look at some examples. Weight loss is one of the most common, examples that we see on resolutions and people's resolution lists. And so as we really break those questions down, we might look at that as, well, why would I want to lose weight? Why is that important to me? What are you hoping that decision to do something like that, to lose some weight, how would that change your life? What are some things that, positives and negatives, right? What new opportunities and options, for things that could just make life more enjoyable? How could that impact something like that? Would there be any problems that might be reduced or eliminated? And again, when we think about those health relationships, particularly with some of our major chronic diseases, could that have an impact in sustaining my lifelong health? And then, if there's physical or emotional pains, that might be tied to that. And that can be, really within, some long holding habits. There may be, some things that we might really have to unpack to really get to the root of, some health behavior changes, such as this. So it really is a way that we just want to start and just think about drilling down and trying to find how we can, frame ourselves for a success. Because the bottom line is, if you truly don't feel a desire for a goal, that's when that lack of motivation kind of kicks in, and you're gonna need that motivation, regardless of how sensible any type of goal might be. If we just don't feel that true internal intrinsic desire for that motivation, then that's where where our struggles will be. So when we think about breaking old habits and why that is, when we think about how those habits come into play, there's a lot of things that come with that. There's learning. Those are learned behaviors that we have sustained over time. There may be some very complicated emotions and psychological factors that go along with whatever habits that you're trying to reframe. And so when we think about that motive for success at changing those behaviors, we've got to kind of have to go through a process of unlearning some of those faulty strategies that might got us to where we are, and then use that and frame that and replace those with newer and more successful strategies. How long does it take? Well, how long has this been a habit? That's the thing that really it needs to be examined. The longer we've had a habit, usually the more difficult it is to retrain and think about how we reframe any kind of behaviors. And then we need to really think about that strength and that cost benefit, those rewards and consequences that go along with behaviors. And so getting to that point is where many of we see successes with journaling. We seem to be hearing a lot more about journaling than I think, I've heard more about that in the last 5 years in a lot of our programming that we do than I think I've heard in the previous 25 years that I've been doing community education, because that's where those awareness of those decisions, those habits, those situations that we find ourselves in daily, is we bring awareness to that through journaling. And that can be that can happen in a number of ways. It can happen in a dedicated paper journal of where you're tracking, whatever habit it is you're doing. Like I said, I'm going to frame a lot of ours around kind of those healthy lifestyle behaviors of physical activity and healthy food choices. So when we think about some of the mechanisms for journaling, it could be a full dedicated little journal. It could be notes in your planner. That's kind of my approach. I just have different spots in my planner where I try to track how much water I'm drinking. That's something I'm trying to focus on. That's why you still see me reaching for my water bottle every once in a while. Hydration, super important. And I can always tell when I don't keep myself hydrated. So that's one of the things I'm tracking in my planner is I've just got a section where I put water and I put tally marks down for however many water bottles or one of my cups that I might be using, so I can look back and see something tangible. I do the same thing. I have a segment for my exercise. Am I getting on the treadmill? Am I getting on my elliptical? Am I just getting outside to take a walk? And to be able to see how successful I was in some of those patterns. It might be the notes section on your smartphone. It might be an app that dozens of apps out there. I use MyFitnessPal as one when I'm trying to rein in on food choices and food behaviors, and it'll tell me, it's got that database. I can put in what I had for breakfast, what I had for lunch, and it'll start to it will point me to how my nutrient intake is. So it starts with awareness and just finding out what we're doing now so that we can hone in on those targets for change. So, curious to know, have you heard of atomic habits? Have heard that phrase? Or have you heard of the book of the same name? Fascinating book. I will share that book information. I've got 3 books I'm going to share with you at the end, but it's a habits book by James Clear, is the author's name, and he's a nationally renowned speaker and has done a lot of work with Fortune 500 companies, with sports teams. But he makes it very simple. One of the handouts that I sent you is one of his cheat sheets that he references at the end of every chapter in his book. But it gives you this kind of framework for how to create a good habit. And he breaks it down into 4 simple steps. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. And he really talks about habits being a continuous feedback loop. We have a problem phase, that he calls a cue, that leads to a craving. And we're not just talking food. We're talking about, it can be social craving. Your phone going off with a text message can be a cue that can lead to a craving of, ooh, what's somebody sending me? Okay, so it's not just food cravings. Okay, so we've got the problem phase of cues and cravings, and then we have the solution phase of response and reward. And so I'm not going to go into detail on that, but that's, he really breaks that down in this book. But the simplicity of how we make these habits stick, I think is very good. So just using this in like a food related scenario, make it obvious. Okay. If we're trying to create healthy eating habits, then we need to be intentional and obvious about it. Maybe that is having a bowl of fruit on the counter. Oh, I can see that. I'm going to reach for a snack. I'm going to reach for a banana, and making it attractive. I can get all over that. Thinking about food, I'm all about making pretty food, but then making it easy. If that fruit basket is on the counter, that's pretty simple. and then making it satisfying. And this is where depending on what your food habits are, fruit may or may not be satisfying. But we need to think about, when we talked about some of those unlearning of other behaviors so we can relearn new behaviors, we might need to redefine what satisfying looks like to us. And it might look different at different phases on this journey. Okay, so that's how he talks about creating new habits. Now you can reverse engineer this too, and you can, to break old habits, we can work that in just the other day. So making it invisible, okay, making it unattractive, making it difficult, making it unsatisfying. And I think the perfect food scenario for this is if cookies are if cookies are the problem, just make it difficult. Don't have them in the house. You start to reframe that list of what you're bringing to the house, or you make it really difficult and invisible. Maybe they're not on the counter, they're on the back of the highest shelf in the kitchen to make it hard to get to. And we can't see them to trigger that response. So we can think about this both on the intentional of building new habits, but also in the deconstruction of not so healthy habits. But again, it's going to kind of follow that same feedback loop. One of the examples, in his book talked about it was an office example, like a work productivity issue, and he's talking about parking at work, or parking to go to work, and where he parked, it would take him past the bakery, and he'd smell the baked goods, and that would lead to purchasing things that maybe were not going against his resolution of healthier food choices, but not only that, resulted in some sugar crashing later with and some lack of productivity if you've ever kind of felt that sluggishness coming off of a high sugar, low protein type of food environment, food choices, it can really kind of bottom you out. So his decision was find a different place to park so that he didn't walk past that particular bakery. That would lead to being more sustainable with the healthy choices that he wanted to make, and increase productivity at the same time. So it can work in a variety of settings. And the thing I like about the Atomic Habits book is it's not just centered around food. You can apply these same habits development to business principles, to parenting, to service organizations. Whereas some of the other books I'm going to share with you are a little bit more kind of food centric and healthy lifestyle centric. But Atomic Habits, and I'll share those on the book list when we get to the end. So habits and goals, not really the same thing, but it's goals, and particularly SMART goals, that can set us up into success for developing those lifelong habits, because habits are just kind of a series of goal succession that we have made automatic. So SMART goals, is this a term that you have heard before? Have you heard of SMART goals? This is one of the one of the pieces that we teach in our chronic disease self-management classes, and a lot of different organizations will use this concept as well. But when we're thinking about SMART goals, we're talking about goals that are specific, and we talked about where vague goals, don't lead us to any kind of keeping those New Year's resolutions, right? So we need them to be specific. We need them to be measurable. That's one of those things. It's like, can I measure it? When we frame that in a healthy lifestyle, it's like, can I measure how far I'm going to walk, or how long I'm going to walk if I'm going to increase my physical activity? Okay, so needs to be measurable, needs to be achievable. And this is where, when we hear that term baby steps, we need to make sure it's something that we can achieve so that we can see that success. And that's where, those lofty goals that can be so we might be so inclined to make, and if they're not achievable, that's going to be one of those downfalls into not not making progress towards those healthy goals. So specific, measurable, achievable, needs to be relevant to you. Just because somebody else is planning, making goals around something, if it's not and you just decide you're going to copy them, if it's not relevant to you, it's not going to be a step towards success either. And then the last thing it needs to be time bound. We need to bookend these goals to have a specific beginning and end. And, sometimes that timeline will look differently. Again, when in our chronic disease classes, a lot we'll hear people make goals around physical activity or around maybe it's around, some stress reduction types of activities and things that they can do, practices that they can put into place. But sometimes I've had people say, I need to clean out my closet, and that's going to be my, part of my action plan, is I'm going to set a time, I'm going to clean out my closet this weekend. And, I'm going to give myself 20 minutes on 2 days of the weekend. That is one that I've heard commonly in a class. It has nothing to do with any kind of physical activity or food related behaviors. But for a lot of people, something like that might be one of those stress reduction kinds of things. Maybe, that closet, that room, that's something, that's getting cluttered. If that's being something that's causing you stress, then that absolutely can be something that would be a healthy behavior, because it's not always just around physical motivators. It can be around those mental and psychological motivators as well. So SMART goals is what we're going for: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound, as opposed to what I like to call not so SMART goals. Okay. So these are not so SMART because they're not fitting that formula, right? I want to lose weight. Okay. Not measurable, not very specific. Same with I'm going to exercise more. Okay. Put some parameters on that. Give me some specifics. How long? How often? What time of day? Okay. I want to lose 20 pounds by next month. That's not very realistic. Okay. But how many times have we heard somebody say that before planning for some big trip or something? Just like I'm going to lose 50 pounds this next year is not very realistic as well. Because if we do the math, that's like a pound a week, and that's not a very realistic goal. So we always just want to think about that formula. I'm never eating chocolate again. Whew, never and always are two words to probably not include in any kind of a SMART goal, because that's not very realistic either. I'm going to cook healthy recipes for every meal. That kind of falls into that never and always category as well. So, we don't want to hem ourselves into a corner, back ourselves into a corner with goals like that can be just so global and all encompassing, because never, always, and every, not realistic. Okay. So that's where we come into with using this formula that we call an action plan. And you're in your handouts. I also included the action plan form. And this is straight out of our chronic disease self-management classes. And it is a different way to frame that SMART goal process. because it's, as long as we're developing an action plan that can answer the what, the how much, the when, the why, then we're going to be hitting all of those SMART goal parameters. So maybe mine might look like, I am going to get on the treadmill for 30 minutes, 3 times a week in the morning while I watch the news. And I'm doing this, why? Well, I'm doing this because I want to have more energy to be able to start my day. I want to get my joints lubricated so that I can get around a little bit more easily and comfortably. And then the other key piece that we always add into our action plans is this set level, what we call the confidence level. And this is, on a scale of 1 to 10 that we frame our action plans around. And we always want to see people at least around a 7 of their confidence level. And, if you've ever been in the hospital, and they usually give you that pain scale, where are you at on your pain from 1 to 10? Okay, we want to kind of think about that the same way with this confidence level. We want to just be at that confidence level, like I said, 7 or above. And when we go through this process in our classes, and people say, well, I'm about at a 5. And I'm like, well, what's it going to take to get you up to a 7? And maybe they, so that's when we start picking apart those questions, the what, the how much, and the when. It's like, are you trying, for too long? Maybe if my little action plan there of my 30 minutes on the treadmill 3 times a week in the morning, if that was sitting me at like a 5 or a 6, I might look at that and go, well, maybe if I did 20 minutes 3 mornings a week, I could be at a confidence of 7. Or, well, I like my 30 minutes, but boy, next week, man, I just don't know if I could get, because get 3 mornings. So maybe that's going to have to look at 2 mornings, and then I'll get outside on the weekend and actually get outside and get off my treadmill, just because of how my schedule might look. So we start to pick apart that formula to get to the point where we can say, okay, yeah, I'm at least at a confidence level of 7 that I can achieve this plan that I'm setting myself up for. And we encourage people to use this actual action plan. But again, this could be something you put in a planner, Post-it notes. I've put it on Post-it notes and stuck it to my bathroom mirror to keep it in front of my face, especially if it's a new habit or something that I'm trying to accomplish, something that I can just keep in front of my face to be able to see some progress on that plan or that goal. Okay. And so it's those goals that kind of move us towards those mini goals, and succeeding in those mini goals over time that actually move us into habits. And so, that's how we want to think about making that progress. So we need to make it manageable. And this is where one of the handouts, and I saw in the chat someone referenced the handouts. Cheryl, I believe, sent those out this morning, but we can sure talk about that before we finish up this evening. But the third of the handouts that I'd sent out is from one of our programs called Strength in Numbers, which the name is kind of odd, but we like to think about it as fact, it's a community health-based program. But we've heard people say, well, there is strength in numbers, and that's kind of what the premise of this program was developed on, is helping small groups of people work together to achieve goals over time. And I sent you the one on successful resolutions that does kind of mention some comments around physical activity or healthy eating goals. gives you a goal tracker, so maybe as you think about how you're going to get going on setting some goals and how you're going to track that, I've given you a one kind of tool that you could utilize. But as we think about making those goals from goals to habits, one of the keys is just making it manageable. We give the example in there, maybe you want to, maybe you drink too much soda and you're going to want to try and break that down and try and break that habit. Well, maybe you start by replacing, and I actually have a friend who utilized a plan very much like this. He drank a lot of soda. And he just started by replacing, 2 cans of soda a day with sparkling water. And yeah, he drank much more than 2 cans a day, but he liked that fizz stuff, so replaced it with sparkling water, and that became one of those pieces, that helped him to eventually kick his soda habit. So you make it manageable, you customize it to what works for you, break that big goal down into smaller manageable chunks. And maybe that's how that action plan comes into play, and you can, start small and then increase. One of the other, concepts for making a goal a habit is think of your goal like a prescription, like a medication. If your doctor's given you, some medication for blood pressure, or heart medication, would you skip that? So, I mean, the great example here they look like is like, well, if getting more exercise is my goal, maybe if I start to think about that as a prescription, I wouldn't want to skip my blood pressure medication. So why should I skip my exercise either? So again, it's flipping the switch of flipping that mindset of thinking about, how we can think about that. Schedule it. I talk about how I get things into my planner so that I can kind of help ingrain that into the habit realm. We do that with so many other things. When my kids were young, my planner was a mess with, ball practices and band concerts. But your goals need to be scheduled too. I mean, we don't schedule to take a shower in the morning, right? Okay, it's just part of the day. And we're looking to try and get some of these other health behaviors in, just to become just as automatic, because that's what habits are, is goals that have become automatic. We want to, it may take some planning ahead, particularly if we're thinking about healthy food choices. We're going to have to, that's one of the beauties, I think, of meal planning, is it helps us to do that planning out. And then I make sure that I've got the fruit in the fruit bowl on the counter so that it's easy, accessible, and attractive. Okay. But that takes some planning ahead to make sure that I get that. So planning ahead. And then keeping track of those successes. And again, I've got that space in my planner, tick marks for my water, tick marks for my treadmill time, so that I can just track that and being able to write that down when I reach that goal. Because hey, maybe I've got some rewards set up at the end. Still some of those extrinsic motivators, but maybe you build that into your whole plan. And then too, take a picture, and maybe this even starts out as a picture of something that you want to be your goal. Okay. I've seen plenty of people do this in, savings habits to get a new car. They get that picture of that car up, it's in their face where they can see it, and that reminds them to track their spending, maybe curbs some spending in certain categories. So that's one way that you can use, those pictures as motivators. But the other thing, and this is the one that's referenced in your handout, in terms of health behaviors and healthy weight. I talked a lot about weight. I don't want to sound like I get hung up on that, but that is one of the common New Year's resolutions. But what we are learning is we need to be listening to something other than a number on a scale. Okay. because many successful people in a weight loss journey might not see change on a scale, but they might see changes in measurement, in a physical picture, physical physique, or the place where I always seem to notice it is just how my clothes might fit. Okay. Holiday season is hard on a lot of people, and a lot of us maybe are trying to make those clothes fit like they did before the holidays. So that's always been one of my barometers, is just not so much a number on a scale, but how do my clothes fit, what's a tape measure saying, but really how am I feeling, what's my energy level, what's my stamina. Those are the things that we also need to be aware of. I was just watching the chat bubble there. Okay. The other thing we need to remember, we need to work towards progress and not perfection. And that can be very, very difficult. And again, this is where kind of those mini action plans, or having a long-term tracking mechanism, whether it's a journal, whether it's an app, but as we can look over time to see, am I farther along than where I started? But journaling is really one of those ways that can be very, very successful. So perfection, don't worry about perfection, and don't worry about being over restrictive or rigid, because those are the kind of things that do tend to lead to failure. Whether it's things like, it's like, oh, I've got to exercise for an hour every day. Well, even our physical activity guidelines don't say that. So we want to be mindful of, overly rigid goals. We want to avoid that all or nothing thinking. I'm never going to eat chocolate again. That's, is that realistic? Never going to eat dessert. I'm going to always, I'm going to cut out all the bread and pasta. Avoid that all or nothing thinking, and focus on the small victories. And again, that's where journaling can come into place, particularly if you're thinking about, healthy food choices, food diaries, and things like, apps like, MyFitnessPal that I mentioned using. That keeps that electronic diary for you, where I can go back and go, oh, I have kind of reined in on maybe some extra snacks that that used to be evening munching, evening snacking can be a problem for me. And I have noticed, for me, certain foods can feed into that, kind of that evening long habit. Certain things can do that more than others. So that's one of the things that's been beneficial for me in keeping like food journaling, to just notice strategies like that. So I can focus on those small victories. Hey, I've cut out the snacking, or hey, I've chosen, some berries to snack on instead of cookies, or whatever. And always be kind to yourself and forgiving to yourself. We tend to be hardest on ourselves and less forgiving of ourselves than we are of any other person that might be in our lives. And we deserve the kindness, just like that to give ourselves, just like we would extend to others. So progress, not perfection, and always remember kindness. So staying motivated, that can be a challenge. When we started this discussion, we talked about, I'd like to be able to get down on the floor and play with my kids or my grandkids. Well, I don't have any of those yet. I don't have, well, kids, grown. They've not given me grandchildren, so I don't know where that's happening in the future. So I've got to focus on the here and now, and I've got to focus on, focus on why I want to have those healthy behaviors, because I want to feel better. I want to have more energy. I want to go up and down the stairs without my knees hurting. Okay, so my present, really does often outweigh the future. And if those grandkids come along, hopefully I'll be ready for them too. Those daily reminders of the goals and the whys. And that's where I love sticky notes on the bathroom mirror, just for some of those reminders. Or maybe I've been known to put them on the refrigerator as well, to make sure that I'm saying, hey, get the berries instead of, if there's ice cream in the freezer. I don't usually bring that home. Somebody else does, but I will certainly partake of it if it's there. So I just tell them keep it out in the garage fridge because I won't walk out there for it. Making your goals known and getting support. That's where the motivation within community can be so very beneficial. And whether it's an in-person group or even a virtual group. I belong to several virtual groups, kind of Facebook closed groups that I might stay connected with people on, common goals, or maybe it's not even, anything related to food or healthy activity, but yeah, and one of those for me is I joined. We've got just a small group at our church that we're kind of doing an accountability thing on staying connected in Scripture, and so we've got a little mini group that's going around doing that. But it's all here. We're doing it all on our own, checking in with each other. So having common goals and getting support, setting those goals, small and large. Hopefully, the small ones compound over time into those large ones. And as you achieve those mini goals, you have some that maybe build in some of that extrinsic motivation and reward yourself. Oh, maybe after I complete this many workouts, on my treadmill, maybe I'll treat myself to a new pair of shoes, or maybe a new pair of workout pants or something like that. Many rewards that can help you to sustain the behaviors that you're trying to put into practice. And then, thinking how we're going to do, that long-term success. We want to really avoid that deprivation mindset. And when the successful resolutions New Year, New You handout talks about willpower and self-control. And I tell you, I really prefer the term self-control over willpower, because I've got ownership in that. Self-control, willpower, we tend to hear that more in a negative connotation. Oh, I just don't have any willpower to do X, Y, or Z. But if I can flip that script and think about my role in that, in self-control, it clicks something different in my brain. So keeping yourself in that, thinking about, deprivation can really lead you down a wrong path. So we always want to think about a balanced mindset. Okay. So thinking balance over deprivation. And be yourself. Again, when we start comparing ourselves to others, someone else's habits, someone else's goals, that's not going to be sustaining, because it's not personal enough. So be yourself, be you. Focus on the positive. If we need to flip the script in our head from that negative mindset to that positive mindset, that's always kind of that. It starts with that self-talk, and sometimes we just have to start talking to ourselves differently. Use your goal as your compass, and those daily mini goals as your travel plan. Okay, so that's where we think about big goals and mini goals. That big goal is your compass. Those mini goals or those action plans are your travel plan. Okay. Think about where you're at with stressors or triggers. And, because particularly if we think about stress and food relationships, it is not uncommon to have, for people to choose rather unhealthy foods if they're under stress. There's chemical changes that are happening in our brain, and different hormones are driven out craving different things when we're under stress. So there are some definite relationships with certain types of foods. So if we can calm our stress levels, a lot of times, we can calm that emotional eating. And then, the other thing too is like, yes, we're talking about this in January, but there's no reason to wait till Monday, to start, and if we're halfway through January, so there's no reason to wait till February. You can start tomorrow. You can start tonight, with whatever habit that is, those goals that you're trying to focus on. And then remember, we need to be patient. This is a lifestyle change. Those habits didn't develop overnight, they developed over time. And so when we think about unlearning that behavior so that we can relearn new behaviors, we've got to be patient with and kind to ourselves. Okay, books worth reading. I told you, I mentioned Atomic Habits. There it is. James Clear. Okay, this is funny because when I started reading Atomic Habits, it made me thinking about a book that I've had, and this is Habits Not Diets. This is actually the second edition. I've had this book, there's it at, in my possession for many years, probably more than 20. Like I said, there's now 4th edition out. Mine is coming my way. I decided I wanted to have the 4th edition and do a side-by-side comparison, but just in what I've looked at a bookstore, I shopped around and found myself a little bit better deal. But as I was comparing, I was like, oh, there are some updates to that. But when I compared them to some of the strategies that we use in our classes, when I compared it to Atomic Habits, this one that I have with the copyright, with a 1988 copyright, has many of the same principles. It's not new science. He's a psychiatrist that focused on health behaviors. And so Habits Not Diets, Secret to Lifetime Weight Control, very good book. It's another one, Intuitive Eating. These last two, like I said, really focus in on healthy lifestyle behaviors. Atomic Habits is kind of a global thing. But I recommend checking out all 3 of these. But Intuitive Eating really focuses in on the science of eating, why we choose what we eat at certain, and this really gets into the stress relationships of food. So those are 3 books that I would really highly recommend. There are plenty of others out there, but those are, I think, 3 on the top, my top list. I love this quote from James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits. Habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. I love that. Like we said, habits form over time. We, so it takes us, we took a long time to learn them. We may have to unlearn, but the compound interest of that self-improvement, I love that. And I've always been a Zig Ziglar fan. This is one of my favorites on motivation. People say motivation doesn't last. Well, neither does bathing. That's why we recommend it daily. So we constantly need that motivation to keep us spurring on our, along on our journey of a healthy life. That is my contact information. And I will go ahead and I'm going to copy that. Can I copy that? I should drop that into the chat. Before I'll drop that into the chat. I do want to stop a screen share because I do want to show you just a couple websites that I want to be able for you to know. I've mentioned several, of our classes, our chronic disease classes in particular. And the best way for you to know how to find those is through our website. And like what I started backwards. So are you seeing it, Cheryl? There it is. Yep.
Not yet. There we are.
There we go. So you can find a lot of our classes. You know, this is our Urban West Region website. One of the it's all networked within MU's this is, you know, the total website. I like to just point people to the Healthy Lifestyles resources. That'll point you to a lot of it'll point you to a document that has live links to most of our main core classes. Also, I would invite you to subscribe to our electronic newsletter. You can do that right here on this tab, the subscribe to the Health and Nutrition newsletter. If you are looking for, you know, some ways to get started on some healthy eating habits and, you know, physical activity habits, I do like to point people to the My Plate, which is where all of our nutrition information generates from. And particularly if you want to know more about the dietary guidelines for Americans, our current version, you can click straight from there. And I did get an email today saying they're convening the committee to start examining the science. For those who don't know, the dietary guidelines for Americans are updated every 5 years. And the committee for the update that will be released in 2026 has just started convening, and there are ways that the public can follow that process. Also, we have the physical activity guidelines for Americans if you need some motivation to get moving more. So I will drop our website into the chat so you can have that, and drop my email in here as well. And I guess and Cheryl, you have to tell me if there's any questions that I maybe didn't see as we were going along. I popped in and out of the chat bubble.
Well, I see a question at the end of the class. Can you tell us more about the chronic disease self-management classes?
Okay, yes. So these classes, it's one of our core programs that we teach. It was developed at Stanford University, and there's a suite of programs, one that focuses on general chronic disease, not specific to, you know, so we talk about hypertension, we talk about heart disease, we talk about diabetes, kind of an overarching of any kind of chronic disease. We also there's also a diabetes specific one that actually I will be starting a virtual diabetes class starting in the end of the month. I will try to find that link. And then there's also a chronic pain specific class as well. So there are 6 weeks with 6-week classes. Let me see if I can find that the best way. 6 weeks that meet for 2 hours, 2 to 2.5 hours. If we're in person, we generally need the entire 2.5 hours. Virtual classes tend to go a little bit faster. And I'm trying to pull up that so I could even drop you a live link into the chat for the registration for that. Or so if you would follow this link that I'm going to drop in the chat, you can actually get to all of the events, view all events. And this looks like, I think that one's mine. And the beauty of virtual programming that we have discovered is, you know, people can join from anywhere with any group, and that's, you know, because I've had worked with people all over the state and co-taught with my colleagues across the state. So yes, this is mine, and we're actually doing this in partnership with Northland Career Center's Community Ed program. It starts on February 6th and will run from 6 to 8 p.m. in the evenings.
Okay. This really isn't a question, but a person shared, when I have journaled, I have found it very helpful to write on the positive things that were achieved in the day. Like you say, it is important to be kind to ourselves.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And I tell you, it's always fascinating for me to go back and read journals, and I can be very sporadic. I can start and stop, and then I go back. When I go back and read those, I'm kind of reminded of what tripped me up. So yeah. Oh, the Let's Move site. So yeah, so this is for the physical activity guidelines for Americans. A lot of people have heard of the dietary guidelines for Americans and the Choose My Plate. But a lot of people didn't know that there are physical activity guidelines for Americans. And it's just it's a coalescing of the science that we have learned along the way of what, how we help people set themselves up for successful and healthy lives. So.
Okay, I think we got all of the questions answered. I did put a link to the survey in, like I said I would. So if you have
you might need to do it again, because I buried a bunch of buried your link.
I'll do it real quick. There we go. Do appreciate your feedback, and if you have a moment to take that. If for some reason you did not get the handouts, I sent them out in an email about 10:30 this morning, so they might have got buried in your email, but just let me know and I can send them to you tomorrow morning. And my email is in the one you got at about 6:30 tonight, so mine shouldn't be buried.
Okay. And I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your evening to just try and jumpstart your healthy habits.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for joining, for presenting to us tonight, Denise. And like I said, we look forward to your comments. And if you have any concerns, please, reach out to me tomorrow morning and I can get those handouts to you if for some reason they didn't get to you. And if that's it, I'll go ahead and say good night.
All right. Thank you, Cheryl.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.